You told her I was the obstacle. You told her our marriage was the cage. So I opened the door and let you both walk straight into the trap. I found out my wife was having an affair on a Tuesday morning in March, the same day my daughter had her first soccer game of the season. I'd taken the day off to bring her cleats she'd forgotten at home. I walked through our front door at 9:47 a.m. and heard my wife on the phone in the kitchen, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in maybe 3 years. Low, easy, like someone who had nothing to hide because they believed no one was home. I stood in the hallway with a pair of size 6 cleats in my hand and listened to her say, "He won't figure it out. He's too focused on work, you know how he is." I set the cleats on the stairs and walked back out to my car. 22 years of marriage. 2 kids. My daughter, 17, and my son, 21, away at college. A house we'd built together from a 2-bedroom rental and a shared dream about what we wanted our life to look like. I drove to my daughter's school, dropped off the cleats at the front office, and sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes trying to remember how to breathe. I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my days looking for the numbers that don't add up, the transactions that go quiet at the wrong moment, the receipts that appear 3 weeks after the date on the check. I am, by trade and by temperament, a man who does not react. I observe. I document. I wait for the full picture. So that's what I did. I didn't confront her. I didn't check her phone while she slept. I did what I do at work when a client hands me a set of books that look clean but smell wrong. I started at the edges and worked my way in. The first thing I did was pull our credit card statements going back 8 months. I do this quarterly anyway, so my wife wouldn't notice. What I found was a pattern of charges at restaurants I'd never been to, on days she'd told me she was at her book club or her sister's house. Not extravagant. She was smart about that. Always under $100. Always somewhere far enough from our neighborhood that she wouldn't run into anyone we knew. The second thing I did was set up a secondary monitoring alert on our joint accounts. Anything over $50 triggered a notification to my work phone, which she didn't know existed. Within 2 weeks, I had a clear map of her Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The third thing I did was nothing. I went to my daughter's soccer games. I helped my wife plant the herb garden she'd been talking about since February. I grilled on Sundays. I asked about her book club. I listened to her describe books I later looked up and confirmed she hadn't read. His name, the man she was seeing, I'll call him the consultant, because that's what he fancied himself. He was 44, divorced once, with a personal development coaching business that seemed to run entirely on Instagram posts and weekend retreats in the Berkshires. I found him through the restaurant receipts, which led me to a venue that hosted a mindset workshop he'd promoted, which led me to his professional website, which was a masterpiece of vague language and high-contrast photos of him looking contemplative near bodies of water. He had a podcast called Unblocked. He had a mailing list of 6,000 people. He had a revenue model I recognized immediately. Sell the idea of transformation, charge for access to the community, repeat. He also had a history I found in 20 minutes of public records searching. 2 civil suits from former clients who claimed his business coaching had cost them their savings. A bankruptcy filing from 2019 that he'd never disclosed on his current bio. An LLC that had been dissolved by the state for failure to file annual reports. Twice. He was selling authenticity with a paper trail full of holes. And my wife had been promoting his retreats to her friends. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me even when it's inconvenient. My wife is intelligent. She is capable. She had built a small but real interior design consulting practice over the past 6 years, mostly word-of-mouth residential clients. She was good at it. She had a gift for walking into a room and seeing what it wanted to be. I admired that about her, genuinely. But somewhere in the last couple of years, she had started to feel like her world was too small. She said so, not to me directly, but in ways I caught sideways. Comments about other people's careers taking off. A restlessness I could feel at dinner when the conversation lulled. I had noticed I hadn't known what to do about it. He had noticed too, and he knew exactly what to do about it. By the time I'd been watching for 6 weeks, I understood the shape of what was happening. He was using her professional network to funnel clients into his coaching program. She was taking a referral percentage. They were building something together, a business inside my marriage. Funded partly by connections, I'd helped her make over 2 decades of attending her client events and introducing her to my professional contacts. I also understood something else. He was going to leave her. Not immediately, not obviously, but I'd read enough of his pattern, the way his business model depended on a rotating cast of credible-seeming collaborators, to know she was useful to him right now, and that right now had an expiration date. I filed that information away and kept watching. The moment that changed my approach came on a Friday evening in April. I was working late, genuinely going through a client's depreciation schedules, when my wife texted me, "Don't wait up, book club is running long." At 10:15 p.m. on a Friday, her book club met on Wednesdays. I didn't respond. I closed my laptop, drove to the address I'd identified 3 weeks earlier as his apartment building, and parked across the street. At 11:40 p.m. they came out together. He held the door for her. She leaned into him before they reached the sidewalk, like she was tired and comfortable, like she'd been doing it for months. I took photos from my car, not because I needed to confront her with them. I didn't want a confrontation. I took them because documentation is how I think. You build the file before you decide what to do with it. I sat there for a while after they went back inside. 22 years is a long time. There's a grief that comes with this kind of knowledge that has nothing to do with anger. Anger came later. What I felt first was something quieter, the sense of looking at a load-bearing wall and realizing, slowly, that it was hollow. I drove home. I went to bed. I started planning. The first thing I did, and I want to be honest about this, because it reflects who I am and not necessarily who I'm proud of being, was audit his business. Not through any channel that touched him directly. I went through public filings, court records, archived web pages, and the financial disclosures that his dissolved LLC had been required to submit. I put together a 40-page document that would have made a very compelling exhibit in a civil proceeding. I didn't file it anywhere, not yet. The second thing I did was reach out quietly to 2 of the former clients who had filed civil complaints against him, through a professional email address that traced back to a consulting entity I'd set up months earlier for a different purpose. I told them I was compiling documentation for a professional standards complaint and asked if they'd be willing to add their accounts to the record. Both of them said yes within 48 hours. One of them cried on the phone. She'd lost $23,000. The third thing I did was the one I'm still not entirely sure I should have done. I identified 3 people in my wife's professional network, designers, a contractor, a staging company owner, who had referred clients to the consultant's program based on her recommendation. I reached out to each of them under a neutral identity, posing as a journalist researching the retreat industry, and asked them to describe their experience. None of them were angry yet, but all of them had questions they'd been too polite to ask. I started answering those questions, not with accusations, just with information, public information. The kind anyone could have found if they'd known to. Meanwhile, at home, I was the same person I had always been. I made coffee in the morning. I asked about her projects. I came to my daughter's last 3 games of the season. I helped my son move out of his dorm at the end of the semester and drive his things home. My wife stood next to me in the parking lot of his college, and we both hugged him, and she told him she was proud of him, and I watched her face and I could see that she meant it, fully, and that those 2 things, the lie at home and the love for our children, lived in her at the same time without apparent conflict. I thought about that for a long time afterward. In May, something unexpected happened. My daughter came to me one Saturday afternoon while I was in the backyard. She sat down across from me at the patio table, and she said, without preamble, "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how." I put down my coffee. She said she'd overheard a phone call. She said she didn't know who my wife had been talking to, but she'd heard enough to understand that something was wrong. She was shaking slightly. She said, "I don't want to blow up our family, but I don't think it's right that you don't know." I looked at my kid, 17 years old, sitting across from me trying to hold the weight of something that wasn't hers to carry. And I made a decision I should have made earlier. I told her I already knew. I told her it wasn't her fault, and it wasn't her job to fix it. I told her that I loved her and that whatever happened, she was not going to lose either of her parents. She cried for a while. I held it together until she went inside, and then I didn't. That conversation clarified something for me. The extended approach I'd been taking, the slow accumulation of documentation, the careful erosion of his professional standing, had a cost I hadn't fully accounted for. My daughter had been living with this. Every day I waited was another day she carried it alone. I moved up my timeline. Within 2 weeks, I had delivered the 40-page documentation to the State Professional Licensing Board, the Better Business Bureau, and the attorney representing one of the civil plaintiffs who had previously contacted me. I had also sent a detailed, factual, carefully sourced account of his business practices to 3 journalists who covered the personal development industry, not asking them to run anything, just flagging the record. I also contacted a lawyer. My wife didn't know any of this. She came home one Thursday evening to find me in the kitchen making dinner, and she seemed slightly distracted, the way she sometimes did after seeing him. She set her bag down and said, "I heard a rumor today that someone's filed a complaint against Vaughn." Vaughn. She'd said his name out loud in our kitchen, and she didn't even register it. "What kind of complaint?" I said. Business practices, apparently. Some former clients. She shook her head. He says it's a smear campaign. People who can't handle real coaching. That's a shame, I said. You want the pasta or the chicken? She chose chicken. We had dinner. I watched her worry about him across the table, and I kept my face completely still. The following week, I requested a meeting with my lawyer and walked her through everything. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her pen and said, "You've been busy." "I'm a forensic accountant," I said. "It's what I do." She told me what I already suspected. My documentation of the financial arrangement between my wife and the consultant. The referral payments, the business account activity, the paper trail of money, moving in ways that hadn't been disclosed to me, gave me a very strong position in any divorce proceeding. We had a prenuptial agreement from 1999 that would protect the core of what I'd brought into the marriage. The rest was more complicated, but not unfavorable. 2 days later, a story appeared in an industry newsletter citing unnamed sources in public records about a personal development coach facing multiple complaints from former clients. The story was accurate, sourced, and careful. It named him. It quoted from the public filings. It mentioned the bankruptcy he'd never disclosed. His retreat bookings dropped immediately. I know because I was still monitoring the affiliate tracking links my wife had been using to refer clients. Links that, because of how she'd set up her business accounts in both our names, I had full legal access to. Within a week, he called my wife. I know this because she came home that evening visibly shaken, and because she sat across from me at dinner and couldn't quite meet my eyes, and because she said, very carefully, "I think I need to take a step back from some of my business partnership." "That sounds smart," I said. More pasta? I waited another 10 days. I wanted to give her the chance to come to me on her own. I've asked myself since whether that was patience or punishment. I'm still not sure. She didn't come to me. On a Saturday morning in June, I sat down across from her at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a folder. "I need to show you something," I said. She looked at the folder. "What is that, the last 8 months?" I said. I walked her through it the way I would walk a client through an audit. Not with anger, not with accusations. Just, here is the date, here is the transaction, here is what it corresponds to. Here is the text I found when I audited the shared cloud account we'd set up for taxes. Here is the GPS record from the car I co-own. Here is the referral payment from March 12th that cleared 2 days before you told me you'd been at your sister's. She went very still. She didn't deny any of it. She put her hand over her mouth at one point and didn't move it for a while. When I was finished, she said, "How long have you known?" "Since March. And you just kept going, every day." I needed the full picture. She started crying then, not the dramatic kind, just the quiet kind that comes when someone has run out of things to say. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once. She said she'd lost herself somehow, and he had seemed like a way back to something, and she knew now that he wasn't, and she was sorry. I believed her. I believed she was sorry. I also believed that the woman sitting across from me had looked me in the face every day for 8 months, and smiled, and said I love you, and meant it, and didn't mean it at the same time. And I couldn't find a place in myself where those two things could coexist without cost. "I want to work on this," she said. "I want to try." "I know," I said. "I don't." I had already moved my most important personal documents to my office. My lawyer had already drafted the initial filing. My son was home for the summer, and I'd spoken to him privately the day before, which was one of the hardest conversations of my life, and also, somehow, one of the most honest. He'd cried, and then he'd gotten very quiet, and then he'd said, "Dad, I know you did the right thing. I don't actually know if I did. That's the part I keep coming back to." I spent 8 months methodically dismantling another person's professional life. I used skills I'd built over a 20-year career to construct a case while living inside the lie that someone else had created. I told myself it was justified. I told myself I was protecting myself, protecting my kids, protecting the other people he'd defraud if no one stopped him. All of that was true, and it was also true that at some point I'd stop doing it just to protect anyone. I was doing it because I was good at it, and because being good at something, when everything else is falling apart, is the one thing you can hold on to. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. The custody arrangement gave me primary residence with my daughter for her senior year, which is what she asked for and what we both agreed to. My son drove down for the signing date and took me to lunch afterward and didn't say much, which was the right call. My wife, my ex-wife, got a reasonable settlement. Not generous, not punitive. Fair, which is what I'd promised myself I would be when it was over. The consultant's coaching business closed in the fall. I know because I still occasionally check. Not out of satisfaction. More the way you check a structural repair, just to confirm the work held. My daughter graduates in June. I've already bought her a card. I've been trying to figure out what to write in it for 3 weeks, which should be simple and isn't. I want to tell her I'm proud of her. I want to tell her that the year she spent watching her family come apart and still showing up to her own life was one of the braver things I've ever seen. I want to tell her that she didn't break anything by telling me the truth. She just confirmed what I needed to do. She saved me the time of waiting for a confession that was never coming. That's worth something. That's worth more than I know how to put in a card. Victory, someone might say, looking at the outcome on paper, and maybe it was. But winning an audit doesn't mean the company's healthy. It just means the numbers finally told the truth. What you do with that truth is a separate question entirely, and one I'm still working on answering.